obviously a lot of conversation about Frederick, and everyone knows kind of the player he is and what he could bring to the team. But I think what a lot of people maybe want to know is what Edmonton has left. So the first round pick, they still technically do have the rights to for this season, but it's Philadelphia gets to pick between this year and next season, of which which first round pick they won after the Oilers moved up in the draft and drafted Sam O'Reilly at the 2024 entry draft. They no longer have a second round pick because that pick they moved obviously yesterday in the Trent Frederick trade, but they do have the third round pick, which is St. Louis's third round pick. So who knows where that's going to lie? Probably somewhere in the middle of that round, I would think. Actually, no fourth round picks for the next 3 years at least, and then they're missing a fifth round pick as well this season. But other than that, they have all their other picks in play. But like, do you see what's like the Oilers' most valuable asset right now? I guess you could say.
I think if you're an opposing team looking at the Oilers, unless you're making a hockey style trade, which is taking on a player currently on the team and giving back a player on the team, something like that. I don't know who that would entail, but if you're a selling team or a rebuilding team and you're looking at the Oilers, I think you're probably looking at either Matt Savoy or next year's first round pick, or I guess defenseman Bo Akey, who was a second round draft pick a couple of years ago. Those are probably the top three prospects, because when you look at who Edmonton has, there isn't that much more. Sam O'Reilly, who they traded into the first round from the Philadelphia Flyers to acquire at last year's draft, playing for the London Knights. He had a fine season, but hasn't really moved the needle and hasn't really jumped into that, post-draft year, new top prospect thing. The Roby Jarventi, who they acquired from the Ottawa Senators in the offseason for Xavier Bourgault, their first-round pick from 2021, he's been injured for most of the season, so not really much of a prospect there. And then I'm going down the list of top prospects for the Oilers from the beginning of the season. I'm at number 4, and it's Raph Lavoie, who they lost on waivers earlier in the season. So as we know, the draft pick and the prospect situation is not very good. That's one of the most surprising things about the Ken Holland era after his 2 decades with the Detroit Red Wings. Of all the things we thought he was going to do well here, it was drafting and developing, and their cupboards are completely bare now that he's gone.
Yeah, ironically, it was Peter Seravalli was the one who kind of drafted all these players like your Ethan Bears, Caleb Jones,
Stuart Skinners,
Bouchard, I think might have been one
Evan
of his
Bouchard
too.
was him, but Broberg and Holloway were Holland, and those are the only two who have really become NHLers.
Yeah, not a ton, like you said, in the prospect pool. The fortunate thing for Edmonton, I would say, is like you typically don't have to trade your best prospects to get value at the deadline. A lot of teams do want picks, and they do have that first round pick to dangle. We talked about it too before, thinking like, oh, where did their 2027 fourth round pick go? Well, that was traded away in the Troy Stecher trade. So they can probably dip into their 2028 picks if they want to.
It's definitely possible.
Totally.
It's something we've seen before. Like, think back to when they traded away Zach Kassian in 2021 to dump his cap hit on the Coyotes. That was the fourth round pick that they don't have this year. Now Utah has it. So that's a pick made 4 years ago or whatever it was, and now
now it's coming into play.
Yeah, now it's finally coming to play.
The other layer of the trade deadline with what assets Edmonton do have and don't have is the money of Evander Kane. He had to submit his 16 no trade list on the 1st of March. Sounds like the Oilers have kicked tires on trying to move him. It doesn't sound like he's going to. Frank Servalli was on Oilers Nation every day and said that if the Oilers were to trade him, they would have to attach a significant asset to him as well. So I don't know if that's something the Oilers have much interest in, but do you have anything else to add on Evander Kane?
Yeah, this is sort of become what appears to almost be the inevitable thing over the past week or two that we've kind of been talking about it, is that Evander Kane wants to come back with a few games of runway in the regular season so that he can prove that he can be a difference maker for the team in the playoffs. And if the Oilers then want to make additions with the money they had potentially planned to use from the LTIR. There was never a guarantee this was going to happen this year. It was always speculation. It was Kane had his surgeries back in September when training camp started, and everyone just speculated this was going to be the case. But it's important to remember when you look at the Oilers and who their general manager is. This is Stan Bowman, who was just, banished from the game for a few years and now has come back in this situation as the GM of the Edmonton Oilers. Everyone's watching very closely. I don't think he's really not in the spot to be one to do like a wink, wink, nudge, nudge salary cap circumvention move. So, I mean, if the Oilers are going to make a big addition, not Trent Frederick, Max Jones, but, somebody else like a Jamie Alexiak or a goaltender like John Gibson, maybe that fans have been asking for, they're going to have to move Evander Kane. And I don't know, maybe Anaheim or Seattle or a team like that is willing to take on Kane, but then they have to be on the 16-team approved trade list. And as far as we know, Evander Kane's only selected teams towards the top of the standings because, I mean, if you're him, you want to get traded to an Anaheim. Yeah, of course. Why would you want to be in a situation like that?
Yeah, and I do think one thing that's been a little lost in the Evander Kane conversation is like he could come back and be awesome, but like we really don't know. I mean, I think many would think that the impact he could have is maybe lesser than years past because now he's an older power forward in the league. But like he could still come back and play a role for this team. But you mentioned Jamie Alexiak. Frank Seravalli wrote an article all around Daily Faceoff called "Which Teams Are Still Shopping Ahead of the Trade Deadline?" The Edmonton Oilers are on that list, believe it or not. Pretty much every team that is in a playoff push is obviously on this list. And the way Frank spoke about it as well on Daily Faceoff was the first team on the list will likely be the most active. And as you go further down, the less active they'll be. The Oilers are kind of in the middle near the bottom, unfortunately. But actually, to prove how right Frank can be, the Tampa Bay Lightning are first, and they just made a huge splash in East Aid. They're looking for scoring wingers, and they just acquired Oliver Bjorkstrand and Yanni Gord, if you didn't see that
from
deal
Seattle.
as well. From Seattle.
So they're clearly in selling mode.
No cap retention, too. And also on Seattle, their GM, Ron Francis, came out earlier in the week and said they were willing to retain on contracts. Specifically, Brandon Tanev was mentioned. But continuing on, Frank said for Edmonton, they're looking a top objective is a true defender. An ideal fit, Jamie Alexiak from the Seattle Kraken. He said, while Edmonton operates on dual tracks using Evander Kane's LTI money or not, they have gone out and addressed one need by adding Trent Frederick. He brings a different element to the lineup, flexibility, and some size. Their goaltending hasn't been great, but the Oilers have also been a mess in their own end lately. There's a lot to read here because it's just also true. They need another defender in every sense of the word. Carson Soucy is a fit, who is from Viking, Alberta, particularly since he can play both sides. But the Canucks aren't going to do that, do the Oilers any favors. Alexiak has size and term. Jamie Alexiak, $4.6 million with 1 more year left on this deal. Left shot defenseman, but what do you make of Jamie Alexiak?
Jamie Alexiak seems like a really ideal target for the Oilers to acquire, given he's big, long, tall guy, pretty solid defensively, not super physical given his size, but really good stick, really good reach. I mean, Darnell Nurse needs a defensive partner. They've got Matthias Ekholm and Evan Bouchard in the top pairing, then a glaring hole in the second pairing. So it's either they add somebody else, because I don't think John Klingberg's the answer at this point. He hasn't showed that he can be. It's probably either bring in somebody else or use Brett Kulak as your second pairing right-handed D-man in the playoffs. We're not in a great spot right now, and it looks like they definitely need a D-man. But again, in order to facilitate this, it looks right now like Evander Kane has to be willing to accept the deal to Seattle unless Stan Bowman has some salary cap magic planned.
Yeah, there's going to have to be a lot of movement for this deal to work on the money front. A tough one to try and pull off, but you said it there. Like, it's such an obvious hole for Edmonton. John Klingberg just has not worked. He's just not the guy the Oilers need him to be. They need him to just be an average defenseman. Defensive defenseman, I guess you could say. Obviously, he has a lot of offensive gifts, but he just can't play defense like the others would have hoped. So if there's a check down option to Alexiak, is there someone out there you would maybe look at? Like Brian Dumoulin, obviously out of the Anaheim Ducks, wouldn't be a terrible option. Frank said Derek Carson Soucy, but he's unsure if Vancouver would be willing to help the Oilers. But do you think any of those guys would maybe be good?
Brian Dumoulin's probably the fallback option, given his salary cap's a lot easier to work down. We saw the Oilers facilitate the Trent Frederick Max Jones trade by using a third-party team, the New Jersey Devils. So the Oilers could probably get Brian Dumoulin down to a point where they can fit him into the roster even without having to use the Evander Kane money. But that's the kind of thing we're looking at there as another bottom pairing defenseman as opposed to the need they have for their top four.
Just looking through some previous trades that the Oilers could maybe match if they were going to try and get a Brian Dumoulin, which again is not going to blow anyone's socks off, but it's maybe just a realistic way to look at this trade deadline for Edmonton. Last season when Toronto went and acquired Joel Edmondson, he was 50% retained at a $3.5 million cap hit from Washington for a third-round pick and a fifth-round pick. And then Toronto also acquired Ilya Lyubushkin who is a 2.75, 75% retain. It cost them a 3rd round pick and a 6th round pick in some retention as well. So maybe some ways to look at what Edmonton could possibly do on the defenseman front. Again,
what's up, Nation citizens? If you like that video, then you need to be subscribed to the Oilers Nation YouTube. Podcasts, live shows, exclusive interviews, and analysis. Everything you need from your favorite voices at Oilers Nation. And you don't want to miss any of it, so hammer that subscribe button.